The warning came not from the heavens but from a pulse. Dr. Amira Solano was alone in the deep observatory of Astrahalo Station, where the vacuum outside hummed with background radiation and ghosts. She'd fallen asleep beside a half-drunk cup of coffee when the console began to scream an alarm she had never heard in all her years watching stars. The spectrometer trace was a scar across the black, a magnetic pulse from a newly catalogued neutron star in the Carina sector. She blinked through the data once, then twice, unable to reconcile what the readings said. A magnetar, a neutron star's angry cousin, had just erupted, and its gamma-ray beam was pointed directly at Earth. Amira felt her stomach drop. "Kaito," she called over comms, her voice rasping with sleep and dread. "Get in here, now." Lieutenant Kaito Ren arrived, still pulling on his uniform jacket, eyes bleary but already calculating. "What kind of signal?" She pulled up the projection. "NQ-7 Carinae. It's locked us in its barrel." He leaned closer, jaw tightening as the implications sank in. "You're sure of the vector?" "Within 1/10 of a degree." She swallowed hard. The energy curve's narrow classic beam. No scatter. When it hits, the upper atmosphere's gone. Kaito stared at the holographic arc hovering over the desk, an invisible scythe sweeping through interstellar space. "How long until it arrives?" Amira forced the words out. 6 months. The silence that followed was physical. 6 months until a burst of radiation shorter than a heartbeat, brighter than 1 billion suns, scoured the planet's surface sterile. No bomb, no impact. Just light, relentless, precise, indifferent. Kaito was the first to move. "We'll alert the Solar Defense Directorate." Amira nodded, hands shaking as she keyed in the emergency signal. "Start compiling possible shielding options. Partial magnetospheric redirection, lunar shadow shelters, anything." He hesitated. "Amira, nothing human-made can block that kind of radiation." "Then we build something that can," she said through her teeth. "Or we die trying." In the weeks that followed, the magnetar crisis consumed every channel of human communication. 6 months, they said. 6 months until NQ-7 Carinae's death beam reached the solar system. It wasn't the end of the world, only the end of everything on it. Amira became a fixture in every broadcast, her voice clinical but threaded with exhaustion. "The gamma flux will ionize the atmosphere," she explained again and again. "It'll strip ozone, ignite surface plasma, and irradiate all exposed matter. Earth's magnetic field can't deflect that energy. There's no weapon, no bunker deep enough. Our only viable hope is planetary shielding. 50 million people, those already in orbital habitats, lunar domes, and Martian colonies could survive. The rest? 8 billion lives under the open sky, counting the months by the dimming of hope." The Global Council convened emergency summits. Engineers proposed mirrors the size of continents, nuclear smoke screens, even geomagnetic wave harmonizers that might buy minutes at most. The numbers didn't care. Amira tried to sleep between simulations. She dreamed of oceans boiling to mist, forests reduced to static, the quiet that comes after light. Kaito, too gentle for this kind of apocalypse, worked beside her. Once, during a long night cycle, he said softly, "You know, my sister's family just got clearance for the L5 arcology. 2 adults, 1 child." Amira didn't look up from the console. "Good, that's 3 fewer to worry about." She offered to put me on her list. "And?" "Ed," he shrugged. "Told her someone has to stay and make sure there's still something to go back to." She looked at him then, and for the first time, he didn't seem young. The signal came on the 93rd day. It wasn't human. Deep space listening arrays in the Kuiper belt picked up a narrow beam transmission encoded in quantum harmonic frequencies. The translation software didn't so much decode it as kneel before its elegance. The voice was clear, soft, and perfectly fluent in English. "We are the Avenai. We have heard your cry. We can help." The words detonated through the information networks like a second explosion. Within days, 3 unidentified ships entered the outer system, moving faster than any human drive could achieve, trailing faint arcs of luminous plasma. They did not hide, did not cloak, did not threaten. Each vessel measured nearly 7 kilometers in length, shaped like spirals of silver and glass, their curves shifting as though alive. Their drive fields rippled with contained light, bending starlight into halos. On the 6th day, one of them halted in lunar orbit and transmitted again. "We seek to speak with your world's stewards." The summit was held under the Muriel Dome in Switzerland, a vast transparent canopy overlooking the thawing Alps. President Naomi Delacroix stood beside her scientific advisor, Dr. Amira Solano, as the alien envoy descended. The Avenai did not arrive in a blaze of spectacle. Theirs was a gentler intrusion, a column of soft blue light, a shape within it walking until it resolved into a woman-like figure, tall, fine-boned, translucent skin that shimmered with interior bioluminescence. "I am Envoy Saren of the Avenai," she said, her voice harmonic and impossibly calm. "We have come because we know this pattern. We have seen such deaths before." Delacroix nodded, forcing herself to breathe evenly. "You can stop it? We can shield your world," Saren said, "but it will not be without cost." Amira's hand tightened around her datapad. "How?" Saren raised a crystalline sphere, its light threading into the air. A projection appeared, 3 massive structures forming an orbital lattice around Earth, each pulsing with concentric waves. "These are veil cores," she said. "They can refract the gamma burst's energy, redirecting it along safer paths. But to sustain the field, they must burn their containment fully." Amira frowned. "You're saying your generators will be destroyed?" "Yes," Saren replied, "and more. The veil cores are what anchor our own star's stability. Using them here will unbind our systems. In time centuries, perhaps less, our suns will fail." The chamber fell silent. "You'd be trading your civilization's life for ours," Delacroix said, incredulous. Saren inclined her head. "We have existed for 10,000 years. Our homeworlds are quiet now. Our people few. Yours are still learning what it means to reach the stars. It would be wrong to let you end before you begin." Kaito's voice cracked through the secure line from orbit. "Madam President, you need to ask the question. Why us?" Saren turned her luminous gaze toward the hologram feed. "Because you asked," she said simply. "Your transmissions, your debates, your grief were bright enough to see from systems away. Every cry sent into the dark is a kind of beacon." Over the next 2 months, joint teams worked with the Avenai to plan the construction of the orbital veils. The engineering alone defied belief. 3 megastructures designed to refract a gamma burst across the width of a planet. It would take the full commitment of the human fleet. And yet the politics nearly killed the plan before it began. The Global Council fought for weeks over the terms of cooperation. Some claimed it was a trap. Others argued it was suicide to refuse. The moral equation was simple but unbearable. Amira finally stood before the council herself, her voice shaking with exhaustion. "This isn't about faith," she said. "It's about physics. The Avenai offer a technology that works. We've modeled it. The only question is whether you can live with what it costs." President Delacroix asked, "And what is that cost, Dr. Solano?" Saren answered for her. "We will give you our veils, but we will ask for 3 things in return." The room stilled. "First," Saren said, "we must use material from your outer system, the metallic ring around your world you call the asteroid belt, to stabilize the field. The energy will sterilize that region. It will never again be habitable for industry or colonization." "And was Dan?" A low murmur filled the hall. "Second," Saren continued, "when this is done, our ships will be helpless. We will need passage aboard your evacuation fleets to relocate our remaining people to safer space. 1/3 of your capacity." The silence became a roar of outrage. 50 million evacuees had been promised seats aboard humanity's arc fleets. To surrender 1/3 of those was to sentence millions to certain death. "And the third?" Delacroix asked tightly. Saren looked at her, eyes silver and kind. "A vow that you remember why it was done, not merely what it cost you. Because your grandchildren will resent us. They will curse the empty minds and the lives not saved. The memory must outlast the bitterness. Only then will this act have meaning." When the vote passed, Amira wept, not in relief, but in exhaustion. 50 million saved. Billions left behind. The belt sterilized. The future rewritten. In orbit, the Avenai ships unfolded their veil cores, each petal shimmering like a mirror spun from sunlight. The structures linked into a lattice around Earth's magnetic field, forming a translucent cocoon that glowed faintly blue. Kaito's voice crackled through the comms as the calibration began. 6 months, Amira. 6 months of arguing, praying, building, and it comes down to one pulse. She smiled through tears. That's science. The universe gives you one shot. It came without sound, without warning. From half a galaxy away, NQ-7 Carinae spat its fury across the void, a burst of radiation traveling faster than any fear. When it reached the solar system, space itself seemed to scream. The Avenai veils flared to life, bathing Earth in concentric waves of blue-white light. Energy poured through them like the breath of a dying god. The outer layers vaporized instantly, feeding the next with heat and plasma until the lattice glowed brighter than the Sunday. Amira watched from the lunar surface, her reflection dwarfed by the living aurora that wrapped the planet. Every molecule of her body hummed with radiation. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something within the light faces, hands, echoes of those who would never see the morning. Then, it was over. The veils collapsed, falling into glowing ribbons that disintegrated as they drifted away. Earth's atmosphere rippled but held. The sky turned gold. The ocean steamed but did not boil. Humanity survived. Amira sank to her knees on the moon's dusty surface, whispering, "You did it." When the dust cleared, President Delacroix and Dr. Solano boarded the lead Avenai ship. Inside, the walls pulsed faintly, the light fading like the last beats of a heart. Saren stood waiting, her glow dimmed. "It is done," she said softly. "Your world lives." Naomi Delacroix bowed her head. "You've doomed your own to save ours." "We've given you our last light," Saren said. "Make something beautiful from it." Amira stepped forward. "You'll need somewhere to go." Saren smiled. "We will find quiet stars. What remains of our people will drift together until the end comes. Perhaps we will dream of you." She reached into a chamber and withdrew a small crystalline core glowing faintly blue. "This contains our story, our language, the mathematics of the veils, and a map to where we travel. Not so you can follow, but so you can remember." Amira took it with shaking hands. The core was warm. When the Avenai ships turned to leave, their drives bloomed with soft light spirals of luminous vapor curling through space. People on Earth watched the trails from every rooftop, every desert, every surviving city. They called it the Sky of Hands, because from the ground, it looked like fingers reaching upward like a blessing. Amira returned to Astra Halo to oversee the rebuilding of orbital systems. She never saw Saren again, but she kept the crystal beside her workstation, a quiet heartbeat of blue light in the sterile lab. When she died, decades later, it was placed in the presidential archives with one instruction carved into its base. Remember why it was done, not only what it cost. Captain Rhea Vale stood at the viewport of the Tuss Solace, 500 years after the burst that had once almost erased humanity. The legend of the Minute of Light was now a ritual. Every year, every world in the Terran Union paused to honor the moment the veils burned and the sky lived. But now, on the edge of charted space, the Solace had found something impossible. "Captain," said Science Officer Dr. Miradal, her voice trembling, "you'll want to see this." Rhea turned. On the main screen, a pale sun flickered like a dying coal. Around it orbited a frozen world, its surface latticed with silver ruins that glimmered faintly under the failing light. "Life signs?" Rhea asked. "Barely. A few thousand, deep under the ice." Lieutenant Leor Tannen added quietly, "The architectural traces match perfectly. The Avenai." Rhea felt her pulse slow, disbelief turning to awe. "They saved us and burned their stars to do it." She touched the glass, her reflection merging with the dying light of that distant world. "After 5 centuries," she whispered, "we finally found them." The comms crackled. A voice came through, faint, aged, but unmistakably Avenai. "Human vessel. This is Elder Siren of the Avenai remnant. We remember your people. Rhea smiled, tears stinging her eyes. Elder Siren, this is Captain Vale of the Solace. You once saved our world. Now it's our turn. The reply was a single word, trembling with wonder. Remembered. And as the Solace descended toward the frozen planet, humanity prepared to repay the light that had once saved its sky. The industrial fleet had been waiting. Tens of thousands of vessels, cargo haulers, miners, freighters, colony constructors were already assembled in deep orbit. They were the lifeblood of the human expansion, the arteries that fed the colonies with air and water and food. Now, they were to become something else entirely. Saren, pale and frail, summoned Amira and Naomi to the orbital platform that served as her final command post. You promised, she said simply. Now you must keep it. Naomi's eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion. The fleet's being loaded as we speak. 50,000 ships. We've stripped every trade lane bare. Kaito, standing at Amira's side, added quietly. Mars is already reporting crop failures. If these ships leave, there'll be famine. Saren's bioluminescence flickered faintly, like the pulse of a candle. You will starve, but you will live. We would not survive even that. Amira looked at the fleet manifest on the hollow display. Ship names she knew, crew rosters, whole industries uprooted and reassigned. The task ahead was almost impossible. A relocation across 40 light-years to a dim red star on the Avenai's ancient map. 40 light-years, she said softly. You'll never reach it. Siren's expression did not change. Then we will die trying. But not here. Not in orbit around a world that was never ours. Naomi took a long breath. We'll go with you, at least part of the way. Your fleets will carry us, Saren said. That is enough. The convoy formed beyond Pluto, a swarm of human ships interspersed with the larger, wounded Avenai vessels. From a distance, they looked like drifting embers in the dark, thousands of small lights curving together into a long, shining arc. Each human ship carried Avenai passengers, engineers, children, fragments of a dying culture preserved in crystalline archives. The Avenai taught as they traveled. In the shared decks of the freighters, alien voices wove songs into human work chants, language blurred. The convoy became a single, multilingual hum of exhaustion and will. Amira stood with Saren on the final day before departure. The stars beyond the viewport seemed impossibly cold. You could stay, Amira said quietly. We'd find a way to sustain you here. Saren smiled faintly. Our history is long enough. You need not make room for us in yours. Where will you go? Saren lifted a trembling hand, pointing toward the holographic map of their route. A red dwarf. We call it Aerith. It is quiet there, and old. Perhaps that is enough. Amira nodded. Then we'll send you home. Naomi entered the chamber then, her uniform immaculate despite the sleepless nights. The convoy is ready. Saren turned to her. Thank you. Naomi shook her head. No, thank you for giving us something worth thanking you for. When the order came, the engines ignited one by one, a chain reaction of blue fire blooming across the darkness. The ships began their slow, deliberate movement outward, like a river of light flowing away from the Sunday. People on Earth and Luna watched the transmission from their rooftops. The sight filled every screen. 3 massive Avenai vessels at the heart of a swarm of human freighters, their engines glowing pale blue, stretching into the void. It became known as the farewell burn. But it was not a farewell of death. It was the first human-led exodus for another people, a torch passed from one civilization to the next. The Avenai convoy took 22 years to reach the halfway mark to Aerith. The human ships that accompanied them changed crews, cycled resources, replaced hull plates worn down by cosmic radiation. Every generation aboard those vessels left letters to the next, each repeating the same vow. Remember why it was done. Not what it cost. The mission was both triumph and wound. The colonies that had lost their industrial fleet collapsed into scarcity. The Martian domes dimmed to half power. Europa rationed air. On Earth, the children born in those years grew up calling the voyage the Great Hunger. For a time, people hated the Avenai, and by extension, themselves. Amira Solano did not live to see the convoy reach Aerith. She died aboard the Lunar Command Station. Her final report transmitted with the words, "The light has moved on." But her name remained attached to the fleet logs. Every ship carried a small plaque inscribed with her handwriting. She turned light into shelter. 40 years after the burst, the convoy finally arrived at Aerith. The planet was cold and beautiful, a sphere of red ice orbiting a dim, flickering Sunday. The atmosphere was thin, the land barren, but deep below the surface lay geothermal pockets that could sustain life. The Avenai stepped from the human ships and looked up at their new sky. It was smaller, dimmer, but it was theirs. A transmission from the convoy commander, the last human admiral still accompanying them, was recorded for the archives. "We leave you here with the breath of 2 civilizations behind you. You gave us our world. We return to you yours. May this place remember both." The human ships turned homeward, their fuel reserves dwindling, their hulls scarred. It took another 30 years to reach Sol again, and by the time they arrived, the home they had left was almost unrecognizable. New governments, new wars, no more belief in angels. But the story of the Avenai voyage endured, even as contact was lost. The last signal received from Aerith was a simple transmission, a harmonic tone that translated imperfectly to a single word: gratitude. After that, silence. The price had been paid in full. The colonies never fully recovered from the loss of the industrial fleet. Mars entered a dark century of scarcity. Europa's domes collapsed one by one. But humanity did not forget. Every academy taught the Solano principle that light, if guided, could become shelter. Every year, at the exact moment the magnetar's burst had struck, every city dimmed its power for 60 seconds. The ritual became sacred across worlds. They called it the Minute of Light. Children grew up under its glow, whispering stories of the Avenai, sometimes as saviors, sometimes as ghosts, but always as part of the same human story. And somewhere, in the archives of the Fleet Academy, an old audio file preserved Amira's voice, still rough with exhaustion but steady. "Mercy is not a gift, it's a technology. You have to keep it running." By the time Captain Rhea Vale was born, the Avenai were legend. The Terran Union stretched across 12 systems now, rebuilt from the dust of its near death. Every colony celebrated the Minute of Light. Every ship carried the Solano motto engraved near its drive core. The Avenai system, Aerith, was known but unreachable. The original convoy had reported its arrival, then fallen silent. No signals, no beacons. Some believed they had perished. Others believed they had simply chosen silence. But humanity had promised, and promises, by definition, required completion. That was why Rhea Vale commanded the TUS Solace. Her mission was not one of exploration. It was a homecoming 5 centuries overdue. The Solace had been built for endurance, not war. Its hull bore the marks of 5 generations of design, evolution, human efficiency, merged with subtle traces of Avenai geometry. Every corridor curved softly, every bulkhead hummed with a faint harmonic tone. The ship itself was a bridge between species, built by descendants who had never met the people they still called kin. The voyage took 4 years through folded space. Along the way, Rhea studied every surviving document of the original convoy. She memorized the names of the engineers who never returned. She read Amira Solano's final reports aloud to her crew as bedtime stories. When they finally emerged from warp near Aerith, the sight silenced the bridge. A red sun flickered on the edge of collapse. The planet below was half buried in ice, threaded with faint lines of silver architecture. The scanners chirped faintly. Residual heat, radiation pockets, perhaps life. "Captain," said Dr. Miradal, the science officer, "we're detecting artificial structures, power signatures weak but present." Rhea leaned forward, heart hammering. "Life signs?" "Minimal," Mira said softly. "Hundreds, maybe thousands, deep beneath the surface." Lieutenant Lior Tannen added, "Captain, the star's magnetic field is failing. The readings match the old Veil core resonance. If I didn't know better, I'd say they built a shield here too and it's dying." Rhea exhaled slowly. Then they learned from us as we learned from them. The comms crackled, faint and filled with static. Then, through the noise, a voice fragile but unmistakably melodic echoed through the bridge. Human vessel, this is Elder Siren of the Avenai remnant. We remember your people. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Rhea closed her eyes. Elder Siren, this is Captain Vale of the Solace. We come from Sol 5 centuries after your ancestors saved our world. We were told you went quiet. Quiet, the voice replied, weak but clear. Not gone. The light grows thin. We held it as long as we could. Rhea swallowed. You're not alone anymore. Static hissed. Then, you remembered. Rhea smiled, eyes wet. We always said we would. The Solace descended through the frozen clouds. As its engines lit the sky, Rhea watched the scanners bloom with signatures Avenai shelters opening, figures emerging into the faint red dawn. Their bodies were thinner, their glow faint, but their movements were graceful still. On the surface, the Avenai gathered, looking up at the descending light. For the first time in centuries, they saw the color blue, the same hue that had once wrapped a distant planet in safety. Rhea stood on the observation deck, whispering to herself. Amira, Saren, it worked. I have not handed. Clear 7. Beside her, Miradol smiled. What do we do now? Rhea looked down at the world they had come to find. We finished the promise. Later, historians would call it the beginning of the Second Veil Age, the rejoining of two civilizations once bound by a single act of mercy. Human engineers and Avenai survivors rebuilt Aerith together, stabilizing its faltering sun with hybrid technology. The industrial fleet, once lost to history, was rediscovered in orbit, its hulls still intact, their AI cores dormant but recoverable. They had waited there, as if asleep, for the return of those who had promised to come. And every year thereafter, at the same moment across all human and Avenai worlds, the stars dimmed for exactly 60 seconds. Ships powered down, engines cooled, the galaxy paused. The tradition's name never changed, because some promises burn long after the stars that forged them. The TUS Solace tore out of folded space, like a breath taken after too long underwater. Instruments screamed, then steadied. Stars resolved out of smear and mathematics. The crew of the Solace felt that familiar, impossible shiver, the moment when probability hardened into a sky. Navigation, confirm arrival, Captain Rhea Vale said, voice even. She stood with her palms braced to the rail, a sailor's old habit transposed onto a ship whose seas were equations. Aye, Captain, replied Lieutenant Lior Tannen, fingers flying. Coordinates match Aerith sector. Wait. A different tone entered the bridge, thin, incredulous. Reading. Mass signatures. Multiple. No hundreds. Captain, we have a dense field in polar orbit around the primary. Rhea felt it before the numbers finished drawing themselves. A gravity shadow too orderly to be debris, too silent to be commerce. The forward screens pivoted, integrating multi-band returns into one ghostly image. And there it was, a ring of ships asleep in a red star's failing light. Ancient hulls, human angles. The industrial grace of freighters, tenders, constructors, bulk carriers, dozens their spines latticed with cranes and skeletal arms. Their paint had burned away to dull metal. Some bore names in antique stencil, toward which the camera drifted as if called. Larkspur, Oberon's Spindle, Kaito's Promise, Miriel, Vara's Hand. They hung nose to tail in a patient procession, engines cold, navigation arrays dark, their frames rimed with frost and the dust of centuries. Ghost fleet, Lior breathed. The bridge fell quiet in that paradoxical way that means everyone is talking at once, inside. Rhea didn't move. She had expected a world first, not a sky full of yesterday. Power? Dormant, said Dr. Miradol, the Solace's chief scientist, her voice threading wonder with sorrow. Minimal background bleed. It looks like they entered hibernation on a synchronized schedule and waited. For who? Lior asked, already knowing. For us, Rhea said. and only then does the second monitor scroll a different truth. The planet below. A white sphere laced with silver geometry, its terminator blushing faintly. A star that flickered like a candle in a draft. "Captain," Mira added softly, "I am picking up subsurface thermal signatures. Population estimates between 800 and 4,000. The signal quality is poor." Rhea closed her eyes. 5 centuries since Amira Solano had turned light into shelter. 5 centuries since the human industrial fleets had carried another species to this dim place and then crawled home in hunger and pride and emptiness. She opened her eyes again and looked into a sky full of waiting ships. "Record," she said. "Ship's log, captain's entry. We have reached Aerith. The first thing we found was not the planet. It was our own hands, asleep." She lowered her voice, and still holding. The debrief table in the Solace's wardroom was a circle, a small architecture of defiance against hierarchy. Rhea let everyone sit before she did. She had learned, years ago under stern captains and tender ones, that command is a kind of listening. Miradal brought maps and silence. Lior brought his fidgeting devotion to accuracy. Chief Engineer Soraya Beck, who had welded her first hull at 13 in the shipyards of Tycho Crater, brought a mug too chipped to belong on a flagship and the look of someone who had already named the ghosts by hand. "Let's set the edges first," Rhea said. "Mira?" Mira projected a 3-dimensional scan. The sleeping fleet turned lazily in the artificial gravity field like a shoal of iron fish. "These are human industrial vessels from the post-burst period," she said. "Hull geometries match fleet archive patterns exactly. The micro-pitting, the thermal ablation on the booms, the slow leakage patterns. Captain, this is the convoy that delivered the Avenai here. There's no doubt. The last human tenders to depart Aerith didn't. Or couldn't," Soraya said. "Engines could have failed in sympathy if they plugged into an Avenai grid, or they may have chosen to stay." She tilted her head toward the names on the nearest hull. Kaito's promise rotated into view. She swallowed, then forced herself back to the numbers. "Power down sequence is immaculate. Whoever did this intended for us to find them." Lior keyed another overlay. "Local radiation map suggests the star's magnetic containment has degraded unevenly. We're seeing increasing flare frequency. That could scramble any outbound communications. If Aerith sent for help, we might have missed it in the static." Rhea nodded. "We'll assume intelligence and intention. These ships waited, not broke. That's a different arithmetic." She let that sit. "Numbers behave. People make decisions. Now the ground," she said. Mira spread her hands and Aerith blossomed in air. Surface. Ice plains intercut with archipelagos of alloy architecture. Subsurface. Geothermal chambers. The Avenai dug down, not up. I'm reading a harmonic signature faint, as if a very small veil field lattice is operating at skeleton capacity. Sati patidant. Word. Indated. A flare jacket, Soraya muttered. A suncoat for bad weather. That's clever and terrifying. Rhea looked at the old human ships again. She tried not to love them. She failed. "We'll bring 2 online. 1 to provide stable power to the small lattice. 1 to be a tug and lifter for emergency work. We'll leave the rest asleep until we know what to ask of them." She looked over to communications. "Ensign, take us to open frequency. Old protocols." And her voice did something she didn't let it do, often softened into the ridges of ritual. "In Avenai trade and Old Earth standard both." The speaker clicked. Rhea leaned into the mic. "To the people of Aerith, this is Captain Rhea Vale of the human ship Solace. We come to keep a promise made 500 years ago. If you can hear me, answer as you are able." The silence that followed had a shape. Somewhere, something moved within it. Static coughed. Then, a voice. Worn, melodic, undeniable. "Human ship, we hear. This is Elder Sirin of the Avenai Remnant. We remember your people." The wardroom exhaled. Soraya whispered, "Oh," as if she had been struck gently in the middle of the chest, where grief and joy share a house. Rhea closed her eyes for a heartbeat, because no one should see a captain's eyes flood. When she opened them, Her voice was stable. "Elder Siren, we found your sky full of our sleeping hands." Static laced the reply, as if the ailing star itself wanted to speak and could not. Then, "We have watched them, little suns that would not rise. We hoped you would come before our light. Forgot us." "We came," Rhea said. "Late, but we came." Then let us begin." That day, in a different sky, Admiral Nadia Quen refused to move a fleet. It had been 47 years earlier, and Rhea had not been born yet. But the story lived in her bones, told each year at the Academy on the night of the flare. The Sarian clans had chosen that day to push on the Orion relay with 3 carriers and a will to wound, because predators can smell when a herd bends around a berth. On the Titan's bridge, Quen had listened to the report, looked at a screen full of ignition charts and supply tallies, and said, quietly, "Let them take it. We are not redeploying." You can diagram such a decision in geopolitics textbooks later. It will look inevitable in hindsight. In the moment, it is 10,000 people realizing the ground under their feet will not be defended because something else must be held instead. Rhea always thought of Quen when she gave an order that made voices hitch. She thought of her now. "Navigation," she said. "Bring us to high orbit on the dark side of the sleeping fleet. Soraya, prep power line bridges. Mira, you are my eyes on the planet's harmonic jacket. We thread this needle without nicking the cloth." The Solace banked through quiet debris, engines subtle as held breath. Ancient hulls drifted past like slow fish. Someone had painted a faded handprint on the side of Kaito's promise. Human, 5 fingers. Soraya touched the glass as if it might be touched back. Rhea's eye caught the name and tightened. "Is that—" Mira's gaze softened. "He died in orbit, Captain, rebuilding Luna's refineries after the burst." There was a gasket and a joke in a flash. "He never knew the pain, they say." "Ren?" Lior asked. "Kaito Ren," Mira replied. Amira Solano's partner in the Vales. Their great-grandniece ran logistics for kindling a century later. His name rode a convoy to Aerith and must have curled here and waited. "It seems right." Rhea nodded once. "There are lives that spend themselves cleanly. Kaito's had been one. You are told, as a junior officer, that bringing a dead ship back is like waking an old warhorse. Be respectful, be thorough, do not assume you understand an animal made for different battles." That advice felt quaint beside Larkspur, classed originally as a Type 4 industrial constructor, towed now to within spitting distance of Solace's dorsal spine. Soraya Beck spoke to the ship like a friend not seen since famine. "Hello, darling," she said over an open engineer's channel. "We're going to do this gently." They laced a set of umbilicals across vacuum. Solace's little suns, their fusion hearts throbbed through superconductors into arteries that had not known warmth since before Rhea's grandmother was born. Soraya's teams in sealed suits ribbed each other with the easy malice of people who will die happily for one another if required, doing the same essential dance their ancestors had done with veils and welders. Married boards negotiated. Old bootstrap routines woke like dogs remembering commands. There were warning flags in dialects no one had used in 3 centuries. Soraya sang to them in curse word and prayer. "Come on," she whispered, to a ship. "Remember." On the 3rd cycle, Larkspur breathed. It was a little exhalation, only one auxiliary fan, one sublight attitude, jet, judder, and cough. But it reconfigured the timing of the universe on the Solace's bridge. A second later, the central display stuttered and reproached Soraya with 312 alerts rendered in amber. "We are alive," she reported, grinning, "and deeply unhappy. We'll be courting this elder for days." "Good," Rhea said. "Make it a pleasant courtship." They chose Oberon Spindle next, a cargo lifter with a spine like a cathedral nave, generous enough to carry pieces of a sky. While Soraya coaxed and muttered, Rhea opened a channel to Aerith's surface. "Elder Siren, we can bring 2 ships online immediately. We can use their bodies as gutters for sunlight, give your lattice a stable source." The reply unfurled after a long, breath-quavering delay. "We have held song together with threads," Siren said, the translator doing its best with a voice whose harmonics were half music, half ash. "2 hands will be kindness." "We have more," Rhea said. "We are waking your inheritance." "So are we," Siren answered softly, and the line clicked. The Solace brought a shuttle into Erith's sky, her hull shedding frost in delicate parentheses. The clouds here were thin, a blush of vapor that made the air look like memory. They dropped into a canyon of alloy, a glittering old scar of Avenai engineering. Pillars rose half a kilometer into the thin air, cross-braced by arches that sang when the shuttle's exhaust touched them. Where ice should have been smooth, it was carved into hex patterns. Where rock should have been naked, thin skins of metallic growth reached out like vines. The Avenai had not built this world so much as taught it to arrange itself. At the canyon floor, they found a door that was not a door, just a change in the texture of the wall, where light refused to reflect correctly. Rhea reached to touch it and felt warmth that did not come from the Sunday. The seam opened as if it had been listening to her hands for years. The shuttle rode a breath of heated air into a cathedral, larger than any she'd known, its ceiling held on the spines of structures like stalactites grown from wire. Below, a city spread in curves and roofs of silver and polymer, dotted with gardens whose plants wore pale blossoms, like the ghosts of flowers. A group of Avenai approached. Their light was so faint, Rhea thought at first they carried lanterns. Then she saw the light came from within thin capillaries, tracing not blood but resonance, the left-behind echo of a species whose biology had long ago married physics. The eldest stepped forward, his skin creased with fine lines like the patterns of frost on a window pane. He moved as if the room had less gravity than anyone else, because he refused to acknowledge the difference. "Elder Siren?" Rhea asked. He tilted his head, a greeting without nod. "Captain Vale." Their translations met in the middle and invented a grammar that did not offend either language. "You came," he said. "We promised," Rhea answered. Siren gestured. It was half invitation, half benediction. "Come see what we have kept. Then we will show you what we are losing." They walked through halls where arguments had been carved into walls. Avenai philosophy had always resolved into engineering, and here their ethics became architecture. On one wall, an equation described how much insult a magnetic lattice could hold before collapsing. Beneath it, a poem asked how much insult a memory could hold before turning into a wound. On a plinth, a model of the first veil cores rotated, their petals catching and releasing the room's light. Around it, small handprints, human-sized, stamped into alloy. "We had children aboard the convoy," Siren said. "We wished for their noise. It taught us to survive." They crossed through a garden where the flowers were little machines that folded when shadows touched them. In a corner, someone had painted a picture of 3 arcs of blue flame across a sky, just as Avenai children on a different world had painted the farewell burn centuries before. The brushstrokes were thin, the paint was thick, as if the artist had wanted the light to stand up and walk away. "Many of us forgot how to speak the old way," Siren said as they walked. "The harmonics declined as our cores did. We sing less. We have learned to speak more. That is a new sorrow." Rhea thought of the sleeping fleet in orbit metal bodies waiting to be asked something. "We brought singers of a different kind," she said. "Welders and engineers." Siren's mouth quirked into something like humor. "We also have welders. Shall we ask them to argue?" "Yes," Rhea said, and that was the moment she knew Aerith and Solace could become family. Not because they loved each other. Love takes too long. But because they looked at a broken thing and reached for different tools at the same time. The Solace raised Larkspur's attitude to a stable station above the planetary pole and extended 400 meters of latticework beamed from its own printer, each strut an instrument tuned to the Sunday. The crew called it a feather even before Soraya stood on the scaffolds and said, "I am a bird." And Mira said, "No, you are whatever invented birds." "He used did maize for." The Avenai sent up a choral team, 3 singers, whose voices carried the harmonics that could persuade a too-hot flare to go sideways and a too-cold convection cell to try again. Beneath the platform, the industrial fleet drifted, asleep. Above the platform, a sun pretended indifference. Rhea took the midnight watch because she found it rude to ask others to do what she avoided. She watched her crew begin to invent a new set of words: pinion, lull, nudge, hush. If the Veils had been an act of war turned backward defense by redirection, this was an act of caretaking. The galaxy had never taught them to talk like that. They had to teach themselves. The Sarian clans returned, 500 light-years away, to argue about the dignity of asking for help. That mattered less here than whether a line of field coils would overheat if the sun hiccuped, and whether an Avenai song held steady when a human engineer miscounted a beat. It did. The singer would never say so. A call came through the deep relay network to Ria's desk. News of the Union Council's debates, rumors of budget cuts, the usual whining of an empire that had forgotten its own industrial fleet had once flown not for itself. She muted it. She wrote back. Instead, the bare-seeming sentence that would undergird 10 years of off-world accounting. The cost of rescue is the price of remembering what we promised to be. They woke Oberon's spindle and discovered that half its storage bays had been transformed decades ago into classrooms. Song notation in Avenai style, human mathematics, crayon drawings of coils that looked suspiciously like felines. Soraya and an Avenai artisan named Fail got into a glorious fight about the correct way to brace a cantilever against a torsion in microgravity, and ended up developing a hybrid brace that would make a researcher in a different century cry. With gratitude. Do you ever think, Lior asked Ria over ration tea, that this is what Quen meant when she let the relay go? That standing and holding doesn't just mean pointing guns? I think, Ria said, that Quen knew you cannot protect a culture by abandoning what made it itself. They toasted an admiral who had died on a farm, and turned to arguing about a phase offset that would keep a human rotor from shivering itself into scrap. A storm, the star coughed. Light bled across monitors into a smear that meant nothing particular until it meant something very fast indeed. The nascent platform above the pole thrummed, the harmonic jacket beneath it shrieked, an alarm on a panel screamed, and Ria's stomach entered freefall, though the ship did not. Here, Mira hissed into comms, her fingers sketching a frequency in the air in front of her face like a conductor. Here, no more if you overfeed it here. Soraya threw a switch with the intimacy of a lover, and the platform sang like a tuning fork struck properly. The storm went past. The ship's shakes subsided. Someone on an Avenai channel laughed. It sounded like a thin bell dropped onto snow. Ria discovered she'd been holding the rail so hard her palm had left sweat marks. She grinned at no one. Again, she whispered, because nothing is learned otherwise. They found a plaque on Miriel in the sleeping fleet. The letters had been countersunk by hand so that time would not scrape them away. The inscription read, "We leave this fleet asleep until we are remembered. If you wake us, we trust you will need us more than we did." Underneath, a small set of letters burned with a different sharpness. N, Delacroix, S, Saren, and, cut smaller, almost embarrassed, K, Ren, and A, Solano. Soraya stood too long looking at that. When she returned to the Solace's mess, she carried her mug like a question. She set it down and did not drink and said, to no one in particular, "He died with a joke in his mouth. The gasket, the flash." Mira put a hand over hers. "And the greenhouse got built anyway," she said. "On Luna, a woman named Nala planted tomatoes and named the first one Kaito's Oath." Soraya laughed suddenly, and the sound kinked around a sob. "That's not a good name for a tomato." "It is," Ria said, "if taste equals memory." They ate in a comfortable silence then, civilized by grief and the day's work. Elder Siren invited Ria to a room that had never tolerated humans before. The door looked like stone, but was a field that yielded to the temperature of a palm and the memory of a name. Inside, the temperature dropped and the sound changed, becoming less like a room and more like a throat. Siren gestured at a long wall of tessellated panes. "Our archives," he said. "The part that isn't your science and our song. Letters, to you, to ourselves, to the dead and unborn." He placed his palm on a panel. It lit. A child's face appeared, luminous with the old inner light at a brighter wattage than any living Avenai carried now. "Dear people we saved," the child said in serene Avenai cadence. "You were loud and you were messy and we loved you." Siren let the panel dim and smiled without apology for such sentiment. "We left a great deal unsaid to you. We allowed your people to build narratives that comforted you, but we were not angels, he said, and when he used the human word it felt handled until warm with meaning. We were tired. We were ready to put down the torch, and you did not ask us to stand again. You asked to take it. That is the rarer kindness, Rhea said. We dropped it, afterward. Siren nodded, and picked it back up. Which matters more? He brought her to another panel. It held simple lines like calligraphy or the traces of a tremor. This is Saren's last letter, he said. We do not show it lightly. He opened it. There were no words. Not at first. Only a harmonic hum and a set of lights that pulsed in a particular ratio. Rhea leaned in. Mira, beside her, went still. Veil frequency, Mira whispered. Truncated. It's a memory of a memory. And then, very quietly, as if the room had learned to make a human voice Saren's timbre on a recording that had crossed gulfs and centuries. If the light arrives after I am gone, the voice said, let it teach you that mercy is a craft. Keep a toolbox. Rhea put her hand on the panel as if to warm it. She forgot, for a brief and generous second, to act like a captain. Bringing the sleeping fleet online without demanding more than Aerith could give became their arithmetic for weeks. Every decision had a tether. If they woke Miriel, they could lift a new segment of the Sunfeather, but it would pull heat from the city's lower gardens for a day. If they reactivated the Oberon Spindle's refinery deck, it would vent scraps of ionized gas that could scar the skin of nearby Avenai air organs. Small harms for larger works, each noted, apologized for, and mitigated. The ledger of kindness is never zero-sum. It is balancing forever. Each day the star flickered, and they discovered they were not bracing a single failing system, but shepherding the tantrums of a deity. The Avenai sang to it. The humans stepped down impulses and notched field strengths and argued about the right word for nudge in trade. Amid this, messages came from the Union. Some aligned with work. Requisitions, the quiet flex of resources, a laconic note from a belt co-op that read, "Spend us like your grandparents were willing to be spent." Others were less useful, inquiries about salvage rights, a senator's request for a ceremonial handshake to be broadcast on a particular schedule, a news outfit demanding a shot list of uplifting cross-species imagery. Rhea told comms, "Put it on a wall." She did not say which wall. It did not matter. Some walls exist to receive noise. She sent a single update to the council. We are present. We are beginning. Expect nothing photogenic. On the Solace's third week at Aerith, the Minute of Light came around the galaxy again. It found hundreds of ships, a dozen worlds, and one swollen star. It found children in domes pressing palms to glass, and an old woman on Earth who had outlived all her lovers standing in a kitchen at 347, staring at nothing because staring at nothing is sometimes the precise thing to do. It found a shrine to Admiral Quen, where someone had left a handful of grain and an empty chair in a lunar greenhouse where a tomato plant named Kaito's Oath sprouted a stubborn fifth branch. On the Solace Bridge, the crew took their 60 seconds. Soraya cracked her knuckles and lay her stained palm flat on the console. Lior closed his eyes and whispered something that might have been math, might have been prayer. Mira listened to the sun and counted a steadying pattern that existed for those seconds and not beyond. Rhea Vale did what she had done since she was a girl. She stood straight, and in that minute told the dead she would do her job properly. When the minute passed, she opened a channel. "Elder Siren," she said softly. "Shall we begin again?" "Yes," he said. "We must. After the ritual, you do not do the thing that looks glorious. You fix a gasket." Soraya's teams chased a rise in flux along the second loop of the feather. Two human welders in tie-down suits cursed with the poetry of their trade, while an Avenai singer named Himri leaned against a strut and sang a minor third that nearly broke one welder's heart. He could not name it, and had never needed. 2. In one of the lower cities, an Avenai child put her hand in a human child's hair and then snatched it away, startled by the feeling. In the same hour, a different Avenai elder hissed in a market, "We will not bow to guests," and another elder answered without heat, "They are not asking." Miradal found the first evidence of what she had been expecting since they arrived. Folded within the Avenai jacket equations was a human shorthand mark, a notation that belonged to Amira Solano's cohort. She pressed her lips together and traced it. Someone had copied an old human hack into a new Avenai scripture, and nobody had bothered to footnote it, which meant everybody had. That is how culture works when it is healthy. That night, Rhea wrote a brief letter to no one. Today we sang to a Sunday. It shouted, and we laughed quietly afterward. Sobriety is not seriousness. It is the refusal to become sloppy with a promise. Quen would have liked Soraya. I think Kaito would have liked the swearing. Amira would have made us eat. She did not send it. She did not throw it away. On the 7th week, the meters went wild. Larkspur wobbled in orbit and pitched. Rhea was already halfway to the harness when Soraya's voice came in low and murderous. Nobody has my ship. The Solace pivoted. Thrusters snapped. Avenai jacket harmonics dropped a fifth to brace the heat, while human reaction mass did the rude, necessary. On the 3rd pass, Soraya shouted, "I've got you, old one." And something in the tone made everyone on the ship grin like sleeping kids. Later on the mess deck, someone found a cloth, and someone else a marker, and they made a new ship's flag for Larkspur and hung it off a rail. A hand drawn like a child's on a field of blue, ringed by 3 arcs. Rhea did not approve this. Later, when a senator asked if such displays were in line with uniform code, she sent a picture of the flag and the single sentence, "Yes." In the 9th week, a delegation of human investors arrived with smiles that put Rhea's teeth on edge. They wanted to help the restart. They brought surveys, bright plans, resource maps, proprietary algorithms with names like Sunweaver and Lumina Flow. They shook the hands of Avenai elders and promised joint futures. One of them asked, very softly, whether salvage rights to the sleeping fleet had yet been assigned. Rhea met them in a room whose windows looked onto the sleeping ships. She did not sit behind a desk. She did not smile. No salvage, no licensing, no proprietary anything. You can donate resources, you can work, you cannot harvest a vow. The tallest of the investors, someone who had learned to make her body look poor in order to be welcomed in poor places, said, pleasantly, "Captain, if you would like this to scale, you're going to need—" "What we need," Rhea said, "is for you to decide whether you prefer your name on a plaque or in a ledger. We know which one lasts." Mira coughed into her hand, failing to hide a grin. Soraya stared at the ceiling because sometimes you need to hold the roof up by looking at it. The investors left a day later, half of them disgusted, the other half richer than they had been on entry because they decided to measure in other units. Rhea received an official request from the Union Council to provide visual confirmation of 3 things for morale: a smiling human child with an Avenai child, a weld, a sunrise. She sent them a different file, a 1-minute, one-shot recording of the sleeping fleet at dusk. No music, no narration. Only the bodies of ships with names older than anyone in the council and the slow blinking beacons of a platform that had been braced with songs. In the corner of the frame, the handwritten name Kaito's Promise. The council published a shortened clip with a voiceover and stirring strings. The raw version made its way across the network anyway, unheralded, loved. People added their grandparents' names in comments. Someone remixed it with the hum of the Avenai jacket, slowed down so it matched a human heartbeat at rest. A boy in a Martian relief camp watched it on a stolen screen and started to plan how to become an engineer alongside his ambition to be a musician. He would. You will not know his name here. He will exist anyway. A year slid past in the manner of such years, months that feel like minutes, minutes that drill into you like seasons. The feather above the pole thickened into a comb. The star learned not to shout as often. The jacket harmonics were still ragged, but their raggedness had rhythm. Avenai gardens bloomed in their silver bones. Human boots learned to be quiet on certain floors, because certain floors remembered footsteps as gravity and translated them poorly. The sleeping fleet stayed mostly sleeping, and no one minded. Waking ships is like spending savings. You must do it for the right reason, or you are not the person who earned them. In that time, Rhea went down 5 more times to the Chamber of Letters. She touched a panel that spelled N. Delacroix and said, "Thank you for counting votes that killed you slowly," and meant it. She touched A. Solano and said, "We are still bending light, and meant it. When she touched K-Ren, she did not speak. She pressed her thumb and left a smudge, because some thanks must be dirty to be true. On the anniversary of the burst, the minute of light came again. The solace dimmed. Aerith cities dimmed. For 60 seconds, the galaxy made an uncommodified silence, and then resumed the work. On a morning whose hour mattered to no calendar and all of them, Oberon's spindle completed a power backbone to the feather. The harmonic jacket modulated without prompting for the first time. The sun rolled its one blind eye less angrily. Rhea felt it as relief in the back of her teeth. "Captain," Soraya's voice came, thin with triumph. "We are ready for the third." "Which ship?" Rhea asked. "The one with our mother's name," Soraya said, then flushed, because sometimes grief says two things at once. "I meant to say Miriel." Rhea almost laughed, though it hurt. "Do it." When Miriel woke, a low rumble thrummed the station. Leor, who had a talent for unglamorous miracles, had been working in the background to align the ship's very old sensors with the new lattice. They synced now, a click like a door remembering its hinges. "Captain," he said, wonder undisguised, "we have a picture." What unfurled across the screen was not photogenic. It was better. A data map of a star's moods, only made possible by an instrument older than the nation that now hung medals on people like Rhea. It showed them where the sun was thin and where it would likely lie tomorrow, the places it wanted to convulse and the places it might agree to rest. It offered the possibility of schedules. Rhea felt something in her chest unclench. "We can plan," she said. The 3 kindest words a commander knows. She opened a general channel, broadcast not to the council, not to donors, not to the news, to the skunkworks of people actually doing the work in their boots and mouths and fingers. "Friends," she said, "we are not safe, but we are less unsafe than we were yesterday." Soraya whooped. Mira laughed in halves and then wholes. Somewhere on Aerith, Elder Siren went silent for a long time and then said to no one in particular, "Saren, listen, they have arrived." As an adder, news came of the Sarian clans again. Somehow, they had learned to ask. The first request was small technical advice for their own faltering Sunday. The second was larger, the presence of a single human ship to consult on a rescue. Rhea did not go. She sent Soraya's student and a recording of Kaito's tomato, and instructions on how to hold a promise without biting it. It was not a victory. It was not atonement. It was an ongoing. This is where an old story would try to end things. This is where it would be wrong. The solace did not solve Aerith's failing Sunday. It did what a kept promise does. Began. The sleeping fleet's first 3 bodies woke and stretched, and others rolled in their sleep, waiting their turn. The feather above the pole took weight and learned to lean. The harmonic jacket below the cities steadied like a singer's breath finding an old pitch. The council on Earth slept better, and then worse. Budgets came through that were almost sufficient and late. A senator lost a re-election because she refused to demand salvage rights and went home to teach, which turned out to be the route through which she saved more worlds. In a lunar greenhouse, a tomato named Kaito's Oath tasted, by all accounts, like sunlight poured through a sieve. On a farm that had once belonged to an admiral, someone left a soldering iron beside the headstone instead of flowers. In the chamber of letters beneath Aerith, an Avenai child pressed her hand against a panel and discovered the warmth of a human thumbprint left centuries too late to matter, and exactly in time. The solace kept station between a sleeping fleet and a sonorous world, and each day Rhea Vale woke and looked at a set of problems too large for any one of them and said, again, "It is never repay in the servant wadding, because some promises do not end when the ribbon is cut and the picture is taken. They begin there. They wear you down. They make you build a different set of muscles. They teach you to measure victories in inches and seasons, and in the quiet moment when a star does not shout. And every year, at the time the veils had ignited around a different world, the lights dimmed on Solace, Aerith, Earth, and the handful of cities between 60 seconds in which you could hear your own chest's small engine and the larger engines we have learned to lend each other. The galaxy paused. Then someone sang. Someone welded. Someone told a child a story about a magnetar and an oath and a fleet that slept until it was remembered. Someone started a motor and turned a screw and stepped a field down by 0.5% and whispered a name into a panel. And far above a world learning patience, the old ships that had carried the Avenai through the dark turned their cold faces toward the work and waited to be asked for one more service. Because some promises burn long after the stars that forged them,